Finding the best exercise to burn fat is not as simple as looking at the exercise that burns the most calories in an hour. It may not actually be oxidizing that much fat. And on the contrary, looking at an exercise that just has a high percentage of fat utilization may lack the over-calorie burn needed to really make a monumental dent. Some things just aren't sustainable for longer periods of time, like super high intensity plyometrics. Like, you can burn a lot of calories per minute, but you can't do it for that long. So where's the happy balance there? After today's video, I put a link down below for a free sample variety pack of LMNT electrolytes. So with any purchase from LMNT, you get a free variety pack of all their different flavors. These are calorie-free or 5 calories or less in certain flavors. And they have 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 potassium, and 60 magnesium. So great way to start the day, great way to fuel yourself during a workout. But the way I use it generally is just to sip on something in between meals to keep me satiated. What is the first exercise that is the best, ranked from best to worst? Running. At the end of the day, it still comes down to running probably being the overall most amount of fat you'll burn in an hour. It's highly, highly scalable. Like on average, if you're pushing it, you can burn between 600 and 1,200 calories in an hour. That is higher than you're gonna see across a lot of other exercises. Because you have the upper body involved, you get more blood flow, you get more mobilization of fat, and you get flat out more caloric burn because you're moving the upper body too. Running is unique because the excess post-oxygen consumption is exceptionally high. So even though running may not bring you into full fat utilization for the full hour that you're running, there's documented literature to show that you're still in oxygen debt for 4 or 5 hours after running. And during that phase, you are more than likely using fat because that is at a low intensity. So the afterburn with running is significantly stronger because your full body has been moving and the level of oxygen debt or excess post-oxygen consumption is significantly higher. The other thing that's nice about running is you can alter the intensity. So you could scale it with an incline, you could go faster, you could go slower. Anyhow, moving into the next one. Next is cycling. Now, cycling and running were a close battle. The only reason running took the cake is because the upper body involvement, but cycling is more suitable for many people because the barrier to entry is lower. You can go for longer. So they're almost tied in a way. Even though per hour, running at a high intensity is gonna burn more than cycling, you could argue that cycling you could go longer. Or you could allow yourself to be in the fat burning zone, a lower intensity, for longer before mechanical breakdown. Because if you were to run for 3 hours, you might really hurt yourself. But if you rode a bike for 3 hours, it might still burn, but you probably aren't gonna hurt yourself mechanically as much. Now, the downside is there's no upper body involvement, which means you're kind of leaving some on the table there. But if you're an able-bodied person, alternating between running and biking is pretty darn awesome. Rowing takes the next cake, 500 to 900 calories per hour with rowing. The only reason it's not higher is because the lack of scalability. It's hard to scale rowing. You have what you have. Even if you're using a Concept 2 rower, it's hard to increase the overall calorie burn because when you increase the resistance on a Concept 2 rower, like an indoor rower, you are really just creating more fan resistance that's allowing you to pull harder. And if you decrease the resistance and you go faster, you're kind of catching the fan when it's still mid-rotation. If you're a rower, you know what I mean. Point is that you're limited with how hard you can push. You can't put your rower on an incline and increase the intensity. So eventually you cap out. But it's still amazing for full body. It's the trifecta, the rowing, the biking, the running, those three together are amazing. Any upper body involvement is really gonna light a fire on things though. There is some evidence that if you train a certain area by getting more blood flow to that area, and by also oxidizing at the same time or thereafter, you might be able to spot reduce more. That sounds crazy, but there's one big study that came out that, I don't know, man, it's starting to look like it could be doable. The next one is swimming, approximately 400 to 700 calories per hour. What makes swimming particularly good is the resistance against your body. You're moving against a physical resistance of water, thereby putting yourself into a nice consistent load, if you want to call it that. Even if the water is like a balmy 75 or 80 degrees, your body is 98.6. it's going to have to work harder through thermogenesis to keep your body temperature up. So you get an extra calorie burn without even trying. Now, the hard part is it's largely technique driven and it's a skill train. So you can't really just jump into swimming and just be efficient enough to go for an hour. Next up is jump rope. Jumping rope, you can burn between 500 and 800 calories per hour, possibly more if you're doing double unders. The problem with jump rope is, once again, it's a skill. 2, you start to involve this more plyometric activity where you're bringing in type 2 muscle fibers, which is great for glucose uptake. That also comes with the downside. You're going to fatigue. You're not using as much type 1 muscle fibers, so you might start actually getting yourself into fatigue as soon as you start increasing the intensity. And if you were to jump rope for an hour straight, you'd have some seriously sore calves and ankles. So you see how we're getting these limitations here. Jumping rope is powerful, but you start crossing into this anaerobic line that might make it harder to sustain. The good thing about jump rope, though, is if you had a lot of carbs the night before and you want to burn through them and burn through some glycogen, well, maybe not as good as running, but you'll burn through some glycogen a little bit. Next up is kickboxing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Kickboxing really is high on the list. When I was doing all this research, I'm like, shoot, yeah, you're still burning between 600 and 900 calories. So more calories than a lot of these other ones I've mentioned already. The problem is that, once again, you run into technique. If you're not efficient, it's hard because you're mixing between aerobic and anaerobic. That's a really good thing to be in, a little mix of aerobic and anaerobic and dancing back and forth. High intensity interval training, like any kind of like circuit training or even just intervals in general. You're still looking like maybe 600 to 900 or more calories. The problem is the intensity ends up being your biggest Achilles heel. The problem is it lacks the continuous fat burn, right? You're into a high intensity zone, which is great for carbohydrate burning, great for calories, great for VO2 max. Trust me, I do a lot of HIIT, but you're not in that fat burning zone like enough. The good news is you do have a high EPOC, again, high excess post-oxygen consumption. So you do burn fat after the fact. But what's unique about HIIT is that because of the high intensity nature and the recovery, and the high intensity nature and recovery, there's evidence to support that it's extra good for visceral fat burning. So if you're trying to lose fat around the midsection or visceral fat specifically, because of the impact it has on hormone-sensitive lipase and just the adrenaline effect of the high intensity work, it might be particularly good for that. Number 8 is the elliptical with arms. Now remember, we're not talking worse, we're talking the top 10. So elliptical with arms still does well. Elliptical without using the arms doesn't even make the list. You gotta be moving the upper body to make elliptical count. The downside is you're moving in a track. So you have less stability, you have less stabilizer muscles that are coming in. So yes, you can burn 500 to 700, maybe 800 calories if you're really pushing it. You don't see people pushing on an elliptical that hard. And the downside is you look kind of funny when you're doing it. If you're sprinting on an elliptical, the whole thing's shaking all over the place. You look like a maniac, you look like the Wicked Witch of the West, and it's just unattractive, right? But if you were to switch over to a treadmill, you could be flopping all over the place and you wouldn't be making as much of a scene. So the elliptical is like, it's good if you're trying to rebuild, but I don't think it's realistic. You gotta push it harder. Most people I see on the ellipticals are never really pushing it. Number 9 is battle ropes. Battle ropes will get your heart rate up faster than you can imagine. We've seen that in studies that when you're using upper body, doing upper body cardio, the heart rate jumps up fast. So for doing high intensity interval training, battle ropes are amazing for HIIT because it just gets you there fast. Okay, the downside is extremely unsustainable for long periods of time, but you can get that heart rate up. So if you're doing a HIIT form, battle ropes make the cut. But you don't want to try to do low, slow battle ropes. I just think you're going to burn yourself out and tear up your rotator cuff trying to stabilize. Number 10, and unfortunately, it's all the way at 10, and it's one of my favorite things to do, it's walking. Walking is amazing for fat loss as a percentage, but it comes down to walking a lot throughout the day. So is it a top exercise for fat loss? Yeah, if it's part of your life. If you just have an hour to exercise, you want to up the intensity. That's the problem. So with walking, the percentage of fat that is burned is huge, especially if you start walking on a slight incline. Point is walking is great. It just takes more time. So integrate it into your life. Now an interesting study that looked at combining resistance training and aerobic training. This was published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning. So they had subjects do aerobic training, anaerobic training on a treadmill, or a combination of aerobic and anaerobic. What they found is that the treadmill burned about 9.5 calories per minute, but mixing resistance training and aerobic ended up burning about 12.5 calories per minute. We're talking a full 25%. If you can find a way to do higher rep endurance resistance training and also do some form of cardio in the mix, you could be putting yourself in a really good position for additional fat burning by more calories, more blood flow, and also staying in that zone 2 range. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.